Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me as always are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey, Rob and Diana, it's me, Jackie.
Oh, hey, Jackie and Rob, it's me, Diana.
What's so funny meeting you all here?
Oh, my goodness.
At our podcast recording studio in my basement. Wow.
I just bumped into you two. I just actually let myself into your house today when you weren't here. So
It's true.
It is true.
They got home and here I was just sitting here.
Well, we were late. It was our fault.
But it was funny.
Did you pretend to talk into the microphones that weren't plugged into anything yet, Jackie?
I did.
Just to warm up?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I already did this podcast.
You already recorded it?
Yep.
Oh, great. Well, take it away.
It's a fake recording though, because I didn't turn anything on.
Oh. Oh, well. Too bad. Yeah, rookie mistake. You have to turn on the recording software.
That's why we have to do it again.
Make a podcast. Well, this isn't really a podcast about serendipitous podcast recording studio meetings. It's a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, where every week we pick a topic and discuss some relevant research articles. And this week we have a topic that we have never, ever talked about. We certainly hinted at, I think, or discussed tangentially related topics, but never done a full episode or kind of dived into relevant research on the subject. And that is ABA and public policy.
Do you know why we haven't?
I have a hypothesis, but why don't you tell us why you think we've never done it before, Jackie?
Because there is what is the word that I love? Paucity.
Oh.
A paucity of literature.
I thought you were going to say a dearth.
A dearth also of
Wouldn't
literature.
that be the opposite?
No.
Oh, dearth is, okay.
Because there isn't a lot of literature around this, and it's not something that you or me or Diana have ever had training in. And there just happened to be a special issue on public policy and behavior analysis and practice. And when I looked at it, I went, ooh.
Yeah.
And I put it down, and I didn't even ask if we could do it. I just said, we're doing it. Here are the articles we're talking about. And that is why we're doing it.
Okay.
Because I wanted to learn more.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
You know what?
And now you all will get to, too.
Yeah.
And full disclosure, I did not. It's not that I didn't want to talk about this, because hopefully people who listen to the show know that I'm always down to talk about any subject and learn something new I did not know. However, I was a little hesitant because I don't know how much I want to talk about fancy public policy things, but I was willing to give it a try. And to do that, I picked a very long of our 3 articles. I picked the longest one. I read them all. I reviewed the notes. And I'm going to give it my best to share. However, I think I am more knowledgeable about what goes into public policy. But I also feel that the conclusion I came up with is similar to the one I came up with regarding lawn care and ethics at an organizational level, which is, man, I'm so glad and appreciative of people out there who are willing to, either for money or for their passion of the subject, do all of this work so I don't have to.
It's so true, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is so true. In this specific instance, I, for a while, was hanging out on a committee of, a subcommittee of the Berkshire Institute of Behavior Analysis and Therapies. They have, little committees, and one of them was professional practice. And every time I went, people were talking about things, and it was like, boom, over my head, boom, over my head. I had no idea what was going on for the whole 3 years that I was on that committee. And I think having some of these articles might have been helpful.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with that feeling, Jackie, because I've been in schools for the majority of my professional career, and I'll still find myself occasionally like, I'm on the whatever committee. And I feel like, oh God, this is the first year I've ever done this job in my life. And I'm trying to learn what everyone's saying. And I'm trying to learn all these ins and outs and rules that no one ever wrote down or trained me in. And I keep trying to come back to, hey, everyone, the research on this subject or my training. And it's like, nobody cares. Like, we're just going to keep talking about it. Not that anyone's mean about it, but it just almost feels like you get that look of like, you know what? I'm glad you're here. And I'm glad you know that that's not how this process works. And that does seem to be the case. And as our authors will tell us, there's a lot that needs to go into public policy discussions that has very little to do with, hey, you're good at your job, or hey, you know a lot about the science of your job.
Almost nothing to do with it.
Really,
Right?
it really feels like, and I mean, I think that's a theme, anytime we talk about a new topic of, hey, guess what? Just because you're good at a portion of this doesn't mean you're good at the specific skill we're talking about. And we can be excited as a field that we're at a point where, guess what? You need to learn about public policy, and there are some real direct benefits to every single behavior analyst practicing out there to know more about public policy. However, as we get bigger and bigger, and as that need for meaningful oversight starts to become more of a requirement to continue to grow and be meaningful and supportive to others as a field, which is, the remit of behavior analysis, we're going to either need to all learn a lot more about it or count on those friends of ours who are just really good and knowledgeable about public policy support. Man, I never was more interested in can we just hire a lobbyist, some sleazy lobbyist who's like, oh, we need more cigarettes in schools, one of those guys to really up the public policy game, because it kind of feels like that's what you need. You need somebody who can just
a great PR person.
Yeah, bake cookies for senators and blackmail the president.
No blackmailing,
if you want
but the baking
I'm not saying
cookies,
you should do that. It has that weird government feel, which I always am left feeling a little icky about.
Let's say that there's an ethical way to engage in public policy, and that we as behavior analysts would do that.
See, I would say there's an ethical way to write about engaging in public policy. I would say that's probably not the way to get meaningful public policy done in real life, which is sad.
I disagree.
I don't know. We just watched that movie Wonka, and it seems like the way you keep your business going in that movie is to pay off the chief of police with candy to get them to beat up your competitors.
I haven't seen that yet.
That's
Thanks for spoiling it.
That's the first beginning of the movie.
Now I'm never going to watch it.
I know. That one plot point is, Willy Wonka, guy makes candy. What?
What?
He has a factory. It's not in this movie, but the sequel movie made in the 70s.
I love that movie.
Yeah. Anyway, let's move on, or we'll just talk about Wonka all day. So we've got 3 articles about ABA and public policy. Diana, we didn't get your thoughts on public policy. I believe when we woke up and said, it's time to record a podcast today, and we were getting ready for it, I think you shared some of them with me, and they were similar to mine. But did you have anything you wanted to add before we get started?
Wait, I woke up with them. Wouldn't that be funny? I'm in the middle.
Jackie also let herself in and was like, I need a snap before the podcast. I'll just hang out here.
That, guys. In case anyone's wondering. No, I've just had cat videos playing in my head basically this whole time.
Sounds good.
No, I've been thinking about we were talking about plethora. We were talking, and I was like, what's the opposite? It's a plethora, right? What's the opposite of dearth? It is, I don't know.
I don't
A
know.
bunch, right? Yeah, so clearly I haven't been. But do you know the opposite of apex is?
Nope.
No.
Nadir.
Oh,
This is what you've been thinking about.
one of those
I love
terms.
that.
Yeah.
I don't know any of these terms.
I'll
That's
share
why,
my thoughts on public policy later once
Okay.
you've earned them.
That's why I fail at all of the word searches, because I never know words.
Yeah.
It's
Fine.
tough.
How about instead I tell you what articles we're going to talk about?
Oh yeah, we haven't done that
Good
yet.
idea.
Okay. We have 4 that we will touch on, and they include why public... Oh, actually, I'm just going to tell you now. They are all from Behavior Analysis of Practice 2023. So I'm just going to say that
Special issue.
now. That applies to all 4 of these articles, so I'm not going to say it each time. But the
So
articles
don't
are...
email us saying, hey, on that episode, Diana, you forgot. Because she didn't.
I just told you.
I know.
Why Public Policy Matters, a call to action for the everyday behavior analyst by Coop, Ice, Tomei, and Urbano Powell. In looking up how to pronounce ICE, which I didn't find the answer to, and I hope is correct, I found out that these 4 folks are also the board of COABA.
Nice.
Colorado, ABA. Why we all need to shape the profession of behavior analysis through advocacy and how to get started by Ivanko, Maslorenko, Kramer, and Napolitano. An analysis of voting and legislative behavior by Cyback. And the Public Policy Advocacy Actions Checklist Success Stories from 3 States by Thompson, Belokas, Johnson, and Williams.
Mm-hmm. And we're not going to be going into depth on all of these articles.
We don't have
because
time.
We don't have time. All of them are sort of variations on a theme in interesting ways. So do give them a read. But some of them we're just going to sort of focus on bits and pieces of the articles. as they sort of lead into the grander scope. But, as we always do with our first episode on a topic, we think we'll cover the whole topic. And then, there's not a lot of research on this subject, but you still can't cover it in like an hour-ish podcast.
Nope.
We'll try, though. All right, so why don't I get us started and talk about Coop et al.'s Why Public Policy Matters.
By the way, I'm glad that they have this last name here, Coop, because that's the best last name.
It is a good last name, right?
It's a great last name, and it's a great title. Like, all around, this actually is my favorite article.
Okay.
Yeah, just want to put it out there.
Well, people aren't usually in charge of their last name. Sometimes.
Yeah, but I just love it.
But they are in charge of the title, and it is
The
a good title.
and the last name of the first author is like, boom, spot on.
So I don't like this article, but it's for very personal reasons.
Because it makes you do something. That's
yes,
why.
That is 100% it,
I know.
Jackie. Because I read this and I thought they're going to tell me the answer to public policy. And I think some of the other articles do more in terms of the grand scope of how much needs to go into public policy. And this article, that's not their remit. They really are looking at what can the everyday behavior analyst, which again is a title I don't like. And I'll tell you why that. I'm just going to grind gears for a minute here. And instead of having, and here's the solution to public policy, people who are highly trained in this, it's like, no, you get off your duff, go do some public policy. And I agree, but I also disagree for personal reasons. I'm a conscientious objector to getting off my duff and doing public policy, I think. I also don't love everyday behavior analyst because I feel like I'm watching one of those like 1950s or 60s educational films about like the everyday behavior analyst gets up and goes to the center.
But that's you.
I know, it's me. And I feel a little
attacked.
Not attacked. I feel like I'm in some sort of like cutesy group of like, come on, everyday behavior analyst, you can do it. Which is weird because I know we've had episodes where I've certainly been associating with them.
Is she like the everyday behaviorist who's on?
I don't know, but I liked it because I thought it was a call to me. It was like someone had written me a text message and was calling me out for not doing something, and I appreciated it.
Oh, okay. I don't know. Being referred to as, I think when I refer to myself as an everyday behavior analyst, I'm fine with that. When I'm referred to as part of a group of the everyday behavior analysts, I sort of feel like I'm being talked down to a little bit. I don't think that's the intention, nor is that in this article at all. That is my own personal feeling. I'm fused with some thoughts.
Is
my learning
reflected
history.
In this article.
It is not.
I don't think that is
not
what they're trying to do.
No. And Coop and Ice and Tomei and Pal, if you are hearing this, I am not critiquing the article for anything other than my own weird personal reasons.
Right, so they give a definition, which is a behavior analyst who actively provides behavior analytic services within their scope of competence.
I know. So by the definition, it is like every single behavior analyst, but there's just something about the term that I don't know.
Yeah, but that's the point of the article, is that you don't have to be working in the fringes of the field. If you are someone who provides clinical services and that is your main focus on the everyday, you can still be contributing to public policy and making a difference in things that matter.
Yes. I understand. All right, into the article. My gears have been ground. So when we think about ourselves as everyday behavior analysts, we are under the auspices of many public policies. So certainly for the majority of individuals who work in supporting autistic clients and their families, you are probably working under public policy related to Medicare or Medicaid or health insurance, or even those who are not doing that practice, you're practicing under certification. That's part of public policy. Who acknowledges your certification? If you are licensed in your state, that's part of public policy. So when we think about public policy, it is impacting pretty much every behavior analyst around the world. And when we look at Skinner and his thoughts on public policy in a paper in the 1980s, or 1980 itself, quote, policy is said to be made with respect to a current situation, a variable having the status of a stimulus, although its effects depend upon many other things. It is the behavior of the policy maker that counts, and the variables just mentioned have a direct bearing on that behavior. So again, when we think of public policy, I think we usually start with these like policies, like we'll change the policies because science or facts. But in reality, you're not changing public policy. You have to change the behavior of the policy maker. And I think when we differentiate policymakers from the policies themselves, it gives us a lot of actions that we as everyday behavior analysts can take. So the policy maker is an individual who, for whatever reason, whether it's a role as an elected official or they're on a board or a committee, notes that there is some issue and requires intervention. they with other people pick a path, enact some sort of intervention, and probably move on to the next public policy, maybe revisiting that public policy in the future based on feedback from constituents or from everyday behavior analysts who are interested in talking about public policy in public spaces. A lot of response effort is required to enact any policy. For anyone who's ever been a part of a committee that's been coming up with action steps, it takes forever to make any slight change because you have lots of individuals, possibly from lots of different backgrounds, sharing lots of information, all of which is valid and relevant to the conversation. If your job is just making public policy, so say you are an elected official, you don't really have time to learn all you need, share all that information, synthesize it, and then develop a policy that will help the most people and hurt the fewest. So a lot of times you will just take action in ways that a lot of people will disagree with. Or even worse, you won't do anything. Well, maybe not even worse. You just won't do anything. There won't be a policy on that subject. And then many people will just be upset and say, hey, how come this policy is so bad? Or hey, how come nobody's doing anything about this? And one of the reasons that we might not be seeing as many public policies that the everyday behavior analyst agrees with or thinks covers all of the relevant issues is because we don't have enough behavior analysts who are informing individuals and lowering the response effort required in making public policy. So how can we meet the needs of our field in a way that is supporting advocacy of the science of behavior and benefiting the maximum number of people and harming the fewest people? And this article says, here's a list of some problems and a call to action, which I don't love, again, as a term because it feels like it's just, here's what I want you to do.
I liked it. I love calls to action. It gives me like...
There's too many calls to action. I don't have enough time in the day. I can't answer all these calls.
You keep being called.
I don't use my phone for calls anymore. How am I supposed to answer them all?
One thing I really loved about all of the articles is they really give a good sense of who is making the policy, and it is not behavior analysts.
No.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that is the critical piece that all of the articles kind of thread between is that the people that are directly affecting our jobs and our clients' treatments and our lives, both individually and as agencies, the people that are affecting us the most don't know about behavior analysis. They don't know about our field. They don't know what we do. They probably have a horrible misconception about our field. And with the exception of a slight few, nobody's really doing anything about it.
Yep.
Right? So I think that is why this special issue was important, because prior to looking at these articles, I was like, I'm going to let somebody else do it. Right? Like, oh, I know this one person that's very excited about it now. Why are they so excited about that? Let them handle it, when in reality, I think all of us should be doing a little bit more because it's our lives that are directly impacted. And until you feel that, right? Both in case like insurance, for instance, if you live in like New York State and you can't practice, now you can't actually do your job because of the legislation that's posted. I think it hits farther. It's like, oh, that's somebody else's problem until it's your problem.
Yeah. I love learning about how New York kind of got around, because I always thought it was just like, New York, what a bunch of jerks there. You know, we're walking here and they don't care. But kind of looking at I think it was, I can't remember which article it was.
Mine.
But it was just going into sort of the detail of that. It wasn't like, and then some evil actor did a bad thing to screw all the behavior analysts. It was just a lot of like, people just doing stuff because they thought it was best. And then saying, ooh, I wish we thought about that more. And now it's a mess. And it took forever to untangle.
It's less of a mess now.
Yeah.
But it's still
it's getting better.
Yeah. But I think that's important to consider, is that we as behavior analysts are doing our jobs and doing our jobs every day. But the people that are basically controlling our jobs and what we can do and when we can do it and how much we can bill for it are not behavior analysts.
No.
Yeah. And the other theming here too, I think, is that we as behavior analysts are very interested and very good at enacting change. And that is kind of like our whole deal. But we are very much micro-focused on making change on the individual level. But the same principles can be applied to making change on a much more macro level. But not a lot of us have practice with that, nor know what to do in order to actually have that happen. So,
or be scared.
So to me, a call to action is giving me some steps, because I can read this and be like, yeah, that sounds important, and still have no idea what to do to actually make any level of difference. So I don't mind the calls to action. It's not saying you have to do them.
Well, let's just say I think I'm in the part of the hero's journey where I refuse the call to action, and then perhaps later Master Yoda or someone will show me the way, and I'll come back home.
You are the chosen one.
Love of public. Then our field is doomed.
Tomorrow morning when you wake up, instead of seeing Diana, you'll see me in a Yoda costume, and I'll be like, whatever, however Yoda talks. Public policy, Rob, you do.
That was good.
I'm really impressed. It was a good call, Jack.
Thank
you so much.
You're welcome.
The sweater you're wearing actually does have some Master Yoda vibes in terms of its
screeny.
Its texture and color.
I have the hat too. I've been working on it. I made it myself. Just kidding. Wouldn't that be creepy? Just let myself in and hang out of your bed.
Yep, just hanging there. We got some lightsabers in the garage. You can really.
The best thing is Diana would not wake up.
No, she would sleep the whole interaction.
Still sleeping.
So this article is sort of coming mostly from the perspective of, as the average behavior analyst is working within a medical model. So there is a heavy focus on medical public policy. They talk a little bit about, say, the difference between that and educational public policy. Certainly, if you are not working directly in, working with autistic clients, some of these steps will not be directly relevant to you, but fill in the blanks in terms of what the policy that oversees your work would be.
I'm glad they brought that up too, because I think it highlights an important problem in our field too, that we do rely so heavily on the medical model, which then many of the limits are to practice across populations that may need us.
Yeah.
Because of policy.
Exactly. So this article then does, and this is, I feel like I've been teasing our authors, and I don't want them to think I dislike the article. A lot of personal stuff here. I'm unpacking a lot on my hero journey here, and I do love the format of problem steps, which definitely took an issue that could be presented way more in a complicated manner and breaks it into chunks that are much more digestible. And you can be like me and say, which of these, I'll try one, pick one and do your best. That's still going to be better than is currently happening. So one of the common problems, or one of the big problems brought up by the authors, is that we as providers need to engage in better, really dissemination means, but effective storytelling. So that we can get the word about the services we provide out and build relationships with individuals who will then develop public policies. We know evidence-based treatments. We know effective treatments. We know the ethics around services. But if we're not coordinating with other providers meaningfully and coordinating with public policymakers, then just having evidence presented or like, look, here's a graph, it's going nowhere. Nobody cares. People are too busy to sort of see some of that. We need to make sure that we're doing this extra storytelling to ensure that we have engagement and also to help with understanding. And we actually have an episode coming out. I don't remember where it is on the schedule, but we're going to be doing episodes specifically on this subject of storytelling.
It's in June. Episode 279.
Excellent. We haven't recorded it yet, but we know we're reading and stuff, so we're getting prepped on that stuff. But we're going to be talking more about what does that mean to tell a story or craft a story. But so, very briefly here, it's how do we talk about research and practice without just citing research or telling about the research we read in a shorter summary, because that's not quite the same as storytelling. We really want to be thinking about the language we're using, and by writing stories that are to the audience that we are hoping to affect behavioral change or to share information so that they can affect meaningful change. A lot of this could be something we need to do both big picture wise, but also in our daily interactions with people who are going to impact, whether they, were collaborators that work on other committees that will go to public policy makers later, whether they're just other professionals in our field that we want to sort of make sure they're using this skill as well. We need to tell stories about what we do and our call to actions. And again, I also love, and they did this pretty well. I broke it down a little bit more in terms of the calls to action and which groups. Spoiler alert, it's almost always everyday behavior analysts. I was really hoping for more like somebody in charge,
That's my article.
When are mom and dad going to help us out with this problem?
Where's grandma?
Where's the adult in the room?
But as everyday behavior analysts, we need to be reading research and understanding the collaborators and the industries that we work in and work with. So if you don't work interdisciplinarily, why not? try to find ways that you can do that, whether it's through reading other journals, whether it's through working on teams that are interdisciplinary treatment teams, because it'll help us know when we need support and know how to explain problems and explain situations using storytelling skills. This builds relationships, this builds understanding. It also builds across countries and other organizations too, not just other professionals. So we need to be better at this.
Part.
I do love that part. That's the part I can do.
I was like, that is you.
Yes, so I'll do that
in a
one.
nutshell.
I'm done. That's it. I'm leaving, everybody. See you later. I'll come back next episode. If you are a provider, your call to action is, hey, help out the people, help out your everyday behavior analysts with this skill, and make sure that it's easy for them to understand what standards of care should be provided or are going to be provided within your organization. Because it's hard to tell a story if nobody tells you what the plot is.
And you're like, and the plot is ... You
know, I always love it when you go to a training, like, everybody should do this thing. Here's the thing. Anyway, do the thing. It's like, how do I do that thing? How do I do? Don't worry. We'll never talk about this thing again. It was a great talk. The second one did not have a header, but I think it was about improving the generally accepted standards of care, which are guidelines based on scientific evidence as to what does medical literature say and what does the medical community say is the reason that this care would be appropriate or provided to an individual for XYZ reasons. So it really seemed to be more about making sure that we continue to work within our fields, with our collaborators, to standardize this process a bit more in terms of what are the types of care, how often is the care given, where is the care provided, how long is it provided. So again, like treatment dosages, continuing to work on practice guidelines around evaluations, intervention procedures. And some of these do currently exist and are, always in the process of being updated and changed as time moves on and needs change. So looking at the practice guidelines for healthcare funders and managers from CASP, our ethics code is one example of standards for care. Identifying applied behavior analysis interventions from APBA, guidelines for severe behavioral disorders was cited from the Japanese Association for Behavior Analysts, the Ontario Autism Program's guidelines for core clinical services and supports. Again, lots of different groups have done some of this work, but as many groups as we have, it's still early enough in our field's history that we still need to be working together to summarize what's there. Because if we're having a hard time finding some of this information, can you imagine the average policymaker finding this information when it's not their job to do that?
The everyday policymaker.
The everyday policymaker says, send me a one-page summary of exactly what you're talking about.
Actually, less than one page. It's like, send me a one-sentence
Give me a tweet
summary
about this. Once upon a time, this service was great, and here's how much, and here's why, and savings.
Let it play as an advertisement while I'm taking a shower.
So this is work that, again, the everyday behavior analyst should be doing by implementing whatever their standard of care is in every aspect of their practice so that they know what it is and they can talk to policymakers and advocate to policymakers about whether it is or is not appropriate or why it should be funded differently because it is so appropriate, making sure we're always using our evidence-based care. And again, call to actions for organizations and leadership. We need more guidance and more training. Again, make it easier for the everyday behavior analyst to know exactly what those guidelines are. Could we do more white papers? Are we giving enough access to literature to the everyday behavior analyst? And are your procedures in line with the standards of care that are appropriate? You can't do that if you're an everyday behavior analyst. Only if you're an everyday organization and everyday leader.
I love that you hate it, but you just keep saying it.
Say it with making a face every time. Can't see that. That'll be the podcast art.
It's
I'll just
fine.
be making a face.
It's fine.
No, okay. As providers need to understand and demonstrate medical necessity that's aligned with generally accepted standards of care. So this really gets down to, are we using meaningful documentation that says what we are doing, says why we are doing it, looks at the outcomes, documents those outcomes in ways that are aligned with the systems in which we're currently working, the policies in which we're currently working, and then making sure that those are aligned with the generally accepted standards of care, and working with our funders of these services and our policymakers to ensure that alignment. We have ethical obligations, though, to understand what are the definitions under which we work and what are the treatments that are appropriate or not appropriate based on some of these policies, as well as based on the evidence that's given. And that's not always going to be the same. So knowing the difference between the two. So as an everyday behavior analyst, you want to advocate to make sure that those standards are aligned so that what you are trained on and what you are documenting and what services are provided align with the approved professional standards that may not be the approved public policy. So we got to make those things line up as best as possible. And when you can be a part of sort of the policies within your organization to ensure that this is happening within your individual groups, if not at the greater, broader, public policy level. And also understand that every funder is going to be different, and you need to sort of be aware of that to ensure that that alignment exists across all aspects of your job. We also need to make sure that as providers of services, we have distinctions between the different ways ABA is used. So they specifically cite medical and educational needs here. What are the limitations across both? How do we define them differently? What are the scopes? What are the trainings and competencies? So really looking at everyday behavior analyst call to action, what are the terminologies that are different, specifically in education and medical ABA? But man, there's a lot of ABA out there, and I love when different groups and different people from different competencies share some more information about how did they get there? What are their policies that I might just not know, or to look up? It's like a lot of work, and I'm just kind of curious. So, I may or may not have time to do that. So we can really be clear about our scopes of practice and what credentials are needed, and making it easier for people to understand that. And then if they choose to get those credentials, start that journey.
I like that too. And I like that they highlight the fact that we should be working interdisciplinary, right? Mm-hmm. So we shouldn't just say like what we've typically done in the past with autism treatment, like this is ours. Mm-hmm. Everyone stay out of here. Like this one's ours, which is not the way that one should work in a holistic, team. And looking where we would be most beneficial as well outside of the field of autism, mm-hmm. right? Because we're not just autistic service providers. We could be doing much more and finding those different organizations and figuring out what we could provide for those organizations along this medical model and educational model, right? And figuring out where we could be a benefit for other people.
Yeah. The next two kind of go hand in hand, and they have to do with licensure and credentialing of behavior analysts and the prevention of pigeonholing of ABA and expanding access of services to underserved populations. And so these are a little bit more of the, hey, everyday behavior analysts, there's some things you can do related to advocacy, but we do need bigger groups to make some of these decisions. So are we as individuals working with those groups and working with professional associations? Because we really should be, because that's how they get some sense as to what practitioner problems are being seen, so that they know what steps are going to be best received or best supported by our community at large. But licensure and credentialing is not just about, hey, let's put some letters and make ourselves look official. It really is about how are we protecting our field, our science, and most importantly, our clients to ensure that they are getting the highest quality of care. So looking at things like, hey, global certification, which is in development in a lot of places because that sort of changed in the past few years, sort of what that looked like. Licensure rules are different from state to state here in the country. So, are our groups working to sort of try to align that a little bit better to ensure that no one, like in New York, is being left out of certain areas of practice, because we have many areas and many groups who need more services than they are getting. And in a lot of those cases, ABA services would be highly appropriate for helping them reach their own treatment goals. So certainly they speak about individuals with intellectual disabilities, Engelmann syndrome, Down syndrome, in which there is some evidence, maybe not as much as we need, but evidence to support the use of ABA in
ADHD,
TBI, improving quality of life.
Gerontology.
Yeah. But however, most of the licensure and most of the certifications and most of the laws really focus on autism plus ABA, as opposed to ABA as a broader scope of service that could be supportive of a lot of different needs for a lot of groups. So again, everyday behavior analysts, you can kind of keep advocating for change by, sharing information with policymakers, going to public forums where you talk about licensure and certification laws. But a lot of that does seem to start being more and more at the larger organizational level, which I know, Jackie, your article goes into more. And then providers and everyday behavior analysts, make sure you're writing all this stuff down and documenting it in ways that both is in line with standards of care, but also in line with documenting the change for your clients. Because the more we can demonstrate how ABA can improve quality of life when we are using our evidence-based practices and effective and individualized services, that's really the proof. That's the story that I think we all wake up and want to tell of. I worked with an individual, this awesome person. They had a need. I was able to help them meet that need, and their life is better because we worked together. That's the story. When you can tell that story, policymakers are excited and they say, well, what do you need us to change to make this happen all the time? But you can't do that if it's just anecdotal or you're not actually providing the services you said you were, or what you're providing varies from person to person. Like, we do need to make sure that we are doing high quality documentation and we are looking at meaningful outcomes. We talked all about social validity on a recent episode. Make sure that's a component of that documentation process. And then organizations take all that information and send it to the people that will read these stories and see these stories, within confidentiality limits. Don't just, send your files over. That wouldn't be any good for a lot of reasons.
No.
It's not a good story and it's breaking confidentiality. But using that information to sort of make more and more the case of how ABA policy can be changed to be in line with better standards of care. So we need public policy. We're going to talk more about the bigger stages of public policy. But for all you everyday behavior analysts out there, just like us, here are some steps that you can take. And a lot of it does have to do with just making sure that you are thinking about the work you're doing, you are documenting the work you are doing, and you are keeping up with the evidence base and looking for areas where what is known about practice in the science and what is practiced in real life are not aligned, and making that clear with your organizations and then possibly, hopefully with your state or local organizations, your ABA organizations. So, yeah. Any more thoughts on this one before we take a little break?
No, let's break it up.
All right, we're going to take a little break and then we'll come back. We'll talk about big picture public policies. We'll be right back.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there!
And we are back talking about public policy and ABA. But before we continue our conversation, I want to remind all of our listeners that ABA Inside Track is ACE and QABA approved. By listening to this episode, you are able to earn 1 learning credit. All you need to do is finish listening to our episode and discussion. Then you can go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, or click the link in your podcast player to go directly to the required informations section. And there you need to put in some key information about yourself, as well as 2 secret code words. I'm going to give you the first one now. It is SWAN, S-W-A-N, SWAN. I did not write this code word, so I'm assuming it is a reference to the main character from the hit 1979 film, The Warriors.
Never saw it.
Oh, well, Jackie, after we're done recording, we're going to go watch The Warriors.
Great.
No, it's a reference to the hard-hitting journalist Jonathan Swan.
Oh, not the E.B. White book, Trumpet of the Swan?
Could be.
Or The Black Swan.
Or the movie, The Black Swan?
Yeah. Okay.
Could be any of these, but we all know it's the one from The Warriors, Swan. All right. So we talked a little bit about what the everyday behavior analyst can do, but sometimes just doing something as an individual is not going to affect a lot of change in regards to public policy because lots and lots and lots of people are involved in that process. So let's talk about Venko, Moslarenko, Kramer, and Napolitano's paper on how we can all shape the profession through advocacy and how to get started. These are good titles. These are really good titles.
These are great titles. These are like, they really worked these titles, right? Because this one fulfills the title perfectly.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's like part of the charge, right?
Right.
You got to get people interested.
And I am interested.
So they workshopped their original title of public policy. It's too hard. There's nothing we can do.
But
what are we talking about?
But
we're all cogs in a machine.
This is a very adult conversation, right? Like,
send me back to the kids' table.
It's, like
May I be excused to go play Nintendo?
I only
You
hear
may.
I only hear about people running for office or doing something public policy related when they get into be an adult. My friends anyway. I mean, like there are some great teenagers that really, but
I
it's-
fear I will never be old enough to be able to do any type of
you will after this article.
Yeah.
You will.
public policy
Every
work.
time
You will.
our state
Okay.
rep, our local state rep, we all have the same rep here at this table, goes to so many like local functions. Like I've seen her many, many times. And every time I'm like, this is the time I'm going to run over and be like, how do you do any of this stuff? Like just like a state rep. It's not even like,
That's
like
your
the
call to
president.
action.
It's like,
That's your call to
you
action.
just seem like you're everywhere and you're so into knowing your community and working in your community. And you've been doing this for a long
Yeah.
time. Like why, how, like, and just
Passion.
I
like,
do think the process must be reinforcing.
Yeah,
For me, it would be punishing, which is probably why I haven't entered public policy.
sure.
But there are a lot of factors at play, which I bet your article is going to tell us
Yeah,
about.
it is. So our field is relatively new, right? We were also relatively little just a short while
this
ago,
is true.
right? And most people know us as autism service providers and nothing else. And one thing I love about this article is it gives us a history of the professionalism of ABA all the way back from Watson to the behavior of organisms with Skinner to the creation of JAB in 1958. Like some of us have
I love the
grandparents
timeline.
I know that are around, like still alive from a lot of
Sure.
this stuff, right? Till JABA, the creation of JABA in 1968, to in between those, the creation of Division 25 and the American Psychological Association in 1964. And it's only been 60 years. Like
Yeah.
that's crazy that it hasn't really been that long. So don't feel saddened that we haven't done as much as we think we should
Want
be doing,
to.
right? Because we haven't really it's only been 60 years. So they also let us know that in 1974, the Midwest Association formed, which later became ABAI. And at that time, behavior analysts were doing a lot. We were working with NASA, we were working with health, they were working with children in urban communities. So our field was broad
Yes.
in the 70s, and I think that's important to recognize and remember. And it only started to get more focused in 87 and 93 with the studies that came out that were published about the effectiveness of ABA with children. And that is when the demand started to come about for behavior analysts and the need to have a license, which was different from psychology. And so 1983 was when the state of Florida made their first certification. They were called certified behavior analysts. I always want to find the people that have that original certification. I'm like, you go, you.
John Bailey.
John Bailey,
Yeah.
right? And that moved into be the BACB in only 1998. Right? Only 1998.
Oh,
I
yeah.
was graduating, not even graduated high school yet.
Mhm.
And it was happening. And the doctoral designation didn't happen until 2008. And RBT was only created in 2013. So
does it make you feel really, really old when you look at your certification and you're like, this was in the first 10 years of this being
Yeah,
a
right?
thing?
yeah, that's crazy, right?
And your BCBADs would be like even less time than that, right?
Yeah.
Timeline-wise? Yeah.
Right. So then there was a need to, help professionals. So that's why a PBA, the Association of Professional Behavior Analysts, was created in 2007, of which I was a volunteer in 2007, which is fun to think about. And our first licensure bill only hit the stacks in 2009. And so they gave us that really fascinating history. I thought they wrote it really well, but then they made this comparison to the psychological community dealing with this very same thing with psychiatry in 1917. They were like, psychologists should only be able to work in advertising and marketing. They should not be able to deal with mental health because that's our field. And I did not know that.
Interesting.
Right? And so the main reason why they do that is because they wanted to remind us that this is not new. Like this our process that we're going through is not new. It's not something that's only us related. Like we need to pull ourselves out of our own butts and look around and be like, oh, why don't we learn from other fields, not our own butts.
Yeah,
I'm
this
sorry.
is like a recurring theme, huh?
And learn about what other people did. And so then they said, this is really important in order for us to remain relevant.
maybe my biggest problem with public policy is more the existential crisis I have at the
Maybe.
idea that society as a whole doesn't say, wait a minute, these new scientific findings are the best, and that's what we should be doing from now on, as opposed to the way it really works in terms of marketing and who do you know and who told the story, whether or not it is true or a lie. And you sort of think like, well, that only happened in, like the Wizard of Oz times. But no, that's still how things work.
The Wizard of Oz times. Yeah.
Little House on the Prairie times.
Okay, I like that, right? And I think you think about that, though, but if we're not at the table making the decisions on funding and who we can serve, then the people who don't understand the breadth of our field will make those decisions for us. And they probably won't be what we want, right?
Yes. Not necessarily the wrong decisions either.
No.
They just won't necessarily be the decisions
No.
that we as a group agree with.
Yeah, and as we talked about, policymakers frequently try to make decisions without consulting to professionals due to time, resources, right? They think, okay, I have these people, they're telling me what to do. I'm just going to do that, right? And it's a challenge for us because historically we have been linked with organizations that only focus on autism-related treatment. So think CASP, right? The Council for Autism Service Providers, and Autism Speaks, right? So those in parent lobbyists have really pushed autism service treatment to the forefront of policymakers. Like they've done the work, right? Behavior analysts really haven't done the work as much as these organizations have done the work to push behavior analysis.
Yeah, and there's the example of a group saying, hey, this science seems very useful to what my family, my child needs.
Right.
So I want this science. And, when you look at it, I know that behavior analysts did a lot of work there, but it was really
really
these
parents,
families,
right?
These parents
Yeah.
who got our field where it is today.
That grassroots organization, right? And so that can be a great thing, but it also can other organizations like CASP or parents of children with autism to then advocate for these other populations of which they're not a part of, like traumatic brain injury or ADHD, right? Any of those things. So then that can also be our downfall. So think New York State. New York State, right? It took lots and lots of work and many, many years in order for behavior analysts to actually practice in the state of New York. What happened was that they said that behavior analysts could only work with children with developmental or with autism specifically. Then they got and related disabilities added, but you couldn't work in the public school if you didn't also have an education license. It was a bit much.
Convoluted.
The level of oversight you needed to have to practice made it so that it was incredibly limiting to who was even able to
Supervised.
practice. Yeah, the supervision.
By, yeah.
And it was just because we weren't at the table, right? We weren't at the table, and until June 2023, now it's been where anyone can work with anyone diagnosed under the DSM, and so that's great.
Yeah,
Right? So it's getting better.
Some of those changes came around also because lots of people were like, well, I went to school. I'm not working in New York City. And
Right.
when they started running out of providers to provide the services, it was something that policymakers and groups sort of, there you had a story of like, listen, we're not able to do any of this stuff because nobody wants to work here.
And because we're a smaller field, this happened in Massachusetts, state of Massachusetts. We also may be governed by others that aren't behavior analysts. So an example in Massachusetts, we were part of public health, I think, for a while.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
Virginia, they're licensed by the Board of Medicine, right? And so it's harder when someone else that's not you is governing your field and they might not know as much about you.
Well, even in Massachusetts, like nursing organizations used to oversee psychologists in Massachusetts. Because I
Right.
know that was something that, my mother's certification and licensure, they always had like nursing stuff. I'm like, you're not a nurse? Like, that's not, he's like, well, that's how it works. And it was so
Right.
confusing as a kid. I was like, those things don't have anything to do with each
Right.
other.
And so I think these points mean this is a time where we have to learn how to collaborate and also learn when to separate. And so they say, okay, some other people are doing this, so let's look at their field. So they focus really on speech and language pathology, nursing, and pediatrics. So one thing I love about the speech and language pathology section is that they publish public advocacy agenda every year on their website, and you can click for each of the major points that they want all the speech and language pathologists to know about with talking points and how then to contact their legislator.
See, there's just
Bam!
like in Coop. There you go. When you have that, it's easy to click, read, and say, I can share this information, or I can disagree and I want to be a part of the
Right.
group and change this information. But
Isn't that
you
nice?
have actionable steps that are a click away, which is
Right.
still a lot of response effort in this day and age, but is much better than
Not knowing
what
anything.
you need to do now.
Right. And another thing that they do too is that if they have an agenda, an advocacy agenda, they also have personal stories to highlight why this would be a benefit. And I love that, right? Because that gives you just more talking points. If you're talking to parents, if you're talking to anyone that's making any decisions that aren't speech and language pathologists, I think that's really awesome that they have this information. But just because they have the information, what they're saying is they may not know how to advocate for their field because they never were taught. So they do have the information, but the authors conclude that they're still not doing the best job advocating for their field because they hadn't had the training to do so. So with nursing, we're seeing the same, right? There's so many different subspecialties in nursing, but the American Nursing Association provides advocacy information on their website at the federal and the state levels and a toolkit for action. And different subspecialties will work together when it's a more common cause. One thing I also love about the nursing section is that in the ethics code, it requires nurses to engage in public policy development. Boom! Right? It's their ethical obligation to make sure that the policies align with their field. And they also have training in the master's and doctoral levels for advocacy so that you're not only saying, okay, here's what's wrong. You have an ethical obligation to do something about it. And here's a training you need to how to advocate for your field.
Yeah.
Boom.
There are a couple other facts. Oh, sorry, Dad.
In doing research in varying areas, trying to find examples of work in our field or that could be applied to our field for, let's say, cultural responsiveness practices, for example, there is a robust body of literature out there for nursing in a variety of these areas, how to do these things. And here are examples in which we've, actually done these things. And that's why, because it's built into their whole systems. Right. So everyone's practicing this. And then eventually some of those, end up as published pieces. And then that can perpetuate those lines of research, which is absolutely something we should be looking at.
But despite having all of this as part of their ethics code, having training on it, they aren't historically consulted first when developing new health public policy. So what they've done is that they've required nurses to be on boards, on health boards, on medical boards, right? So that the nurses are at the table to have that conversation.
And everybody loves nurses, and they still struggle to be a part. But they're always like, what's everyone's favorite job or favorite caregiver?
Nurse.
And it's like nurses are every single year, and yet they still struggle to and have to take steps to push public policy in ways that align with their standards of care.
Yeah. And so the final field they looked at is pediatricians, which that was not something that I would think of. I know it's a field, but I was just like, pediatricians? I don't know why.
Well, it seemed like the story was like pediatricians were being beat up by the other doctors who thought they were better than the pediatricians.
Right, but it's not that. No.
So they got together and made public policy.
The American Association of Pediatrics does contain advocacy on the website. They engage in advocacy training in schools. And one thing that I love that I think could really benefit our field is that they are working toward considering advocacy as a form of scholarship, right? So, researchers, professors, they have to engage in scholarship research and service, right? And typically that does not include advocacy. But if it did include advocacy, then those scholars could have more time in their schedule built for advocacy specifically, that then they could count toward their job, right? Because one of the major issues and limiting factors of people advocating is that they just don't have time to do it, right? Because they're doing their job and it's not part of their job.
Yeah. There's something about that, learning how to advocate effectively, that always feels a little it's like the art of the deal kind of sleaziness to it. But at the same time, I'd like to think, coming at it from the perspective of academic scholarship, this work is happening. Whether or not people with an ethical code are supporting it or looking at the evidence and research around it, everyone out there wants to change something, and not always for the betterment of society, but for the betterment of themselves or a very specific group without looking at the needs of others. So while it sounds a little weird, I think I would prefer hearing these advocacy groups are working together and they have an ethics code of advocacy to make sure that the following things that we all hate when we hear those kind of political wheel deal stories and we get angry at them, they aren't happening because it doesn't need to be a part of advocacy policy. So while I'm a little torn, I think I fall more on the side of I would like to see that as a research-based group that has a level of scholarship behind it rather than what it often seems to be, which is just backroom deal kind of, who can schmooze the best or who's paying off who. Like that's just how all that stuff always kind of
feels like
to me. Like nothing's on the level in a way that I don't want the world to be that way.
I agree. One thing also I found interesting in this is I know that a lot of times when you're talking about change and policy change, everyone's like, why isn't the BACB doing anything? Right? Like they're the ones that should be doing something. But this article points out that they are limited in their scope based on their own governing body. Right? So that I thought was really helpful is that because I know, like, if you're looking on social media, like the BACB, do something.
The presidents of us, right? Yeah,
right?
that's not
do something, but
not
they
a certification.
they really can't.
Yeah,
and so that was really helpful. So if you are looking to enact change, don't email the BACB because they can't do anything about it.
I mean, you can, but you're
they
not.
They can, but they're not going to get it. So what their recommendation is to talk to APBA, right? Because that is their job to advocate for the profession, and to a lesser extent, ABII is what they said. They also, I love just in here, they're like, before we talk about what we can do at the national level and at the everyday behavior analyst level, they use that wording too, is we want to just say, like, do a shout out to CASP and Autism Speaks because, they've really helped us pave the path to where we're at. And, other organizations have helped as well. And they gave a ton, notable WEBA and BABA. And if everyone's working together, we're probably going a little bit farther. So I just love that. So here are the tips. This is what they say.
These are the hot tips.
Hot tips. Hot tips is in this article is, which I agree with, add advocacy to the ethics code.
I want you to take number 2. Say that one first, Jackie.
Oh, add training on advocacy and professional training programs.
Okay, now do the other one.
And add advocacy to the ethics code.
There we go, because that is always a concern. Because if all of a sudden ethics code was like, here's a new update, you have to be an advocate, I would be like, and I'm going to break this code tomorrow because I don't know what the hell this is. And it's a lot of extra work. And I don't want to it's not an area of our field that I'm that excited about being a part of, while I'm happy other people want to do it. So I think making sure
people know what
to do and how we can support that work and what our bounds of competence in the area should be, can be, will be, would make me a lot more on board with the idea of having it be an actual part of the ethics code.
And then
look at me. I'm speaking truth to the public policy.
Boom, I see. I got you there. And then I think the biggest thing is developing resources and talking points like the OSHA website, right? Like here are the things we need to do at a national level, at a state level. Bam, bam. I can just look at them quickly. Now I know what I need to be doing. I've been saying this for years. We should be hiring a PR specialist on behalf of the field, right? We need one bad.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Right? We need a lobbyist. We need someone that knows about media so that they can disseminate the good stuff. They can take the bad stuff that's happening.
Well, I think of Greg Hanley and all his work on televisability of behavior analysis in our procedures. And I'm so in agreement with that. But then part of me is like, Greg, nobody wants to televise behavior analysts doing anything. And that's the problem.
That's the problem, right? Yeah. I think also we need to
when they do, we want to be prepared. But at the moment.
Yeah. And I think right now we also need to advocate for behavior analysts to be on boards where decisions are made, right? Especially where our clients are. And I think those are like the biggest things. These are the biggest take-home points that I like starred and underlined when I was reading. And I was like, yes. The other things I think are helpful, but less us, right? So if you're in a state or local organization, they said, use lessons from these previous states. Like use all the failures from Virginia and Texas and New York and know about them so that you can correct them in the future.
Yeah. This is the perfect time for us to just splice in here about the Thompson et al. 2023 article.
Yeah.
Which reviews a lot of the same important points, but like the really takeaway piece I wanted to pull from that was they made this public policy advocacy actions checklist.
Yeah.
And they used as an example 3 different states that had gone through some of these processes and talked about like which pieces of it they included and which they didn't and how successful they were or were not in all these varying areas. So it was Wisconsin, Arizona, and Massachusetts. And it's almost like a TA, right? This checklist, they break it down. So they say it's the areas are get organized, collect data, inform key policymakers of the issue, and then connect with the community. So it's like the major areas. And then within each of those things, they talked about the different things that these different states did. So did they develop an action plan? Did they hire a paid advocate to represent the association, for example? Did they hire a lobbyist? Did they conduct surveys? Did they do petitions? Did they meet with key policymakers? Did they attend fundraisers? Did they testify at public hearings? Did they partner with ABA and professional groups? Did they distribute calls to action? Did they host rallies? Did they submit op-eds to local newspapers, etc.? So they have so many ideas in here that, again, just further, I think, help us to think about how do we operationally define all of these calls to action that we're talking about? And these are some really concrete pieces that for me, like I need it broken down to this level for me to actually get what we are talking about, to be honest. Like, oh, they want us to go do a petition to demonstrate this is an important issue. Like, this makes sense to me. So if anyone else is like, also feels like you're swimming in a sea of terms that you're not familiar with, check out the Thompson article and it breaks it down really nicely. So back to you, Jackie.
Yeah, I won't really focus a ton on the state organizations because if you run a state organization, you should read this. But here are some of the key points that I thought that this article highlighted that your article didn't, that I think would be easy. Like, participate in career day at your neighborhood school so that people know about behavior analysis and what you could do, right? Make friends with other behavior analysts that work outside the autism field. Give them your support. Whatever that means. Participate in their fundraisers or their 5Ks and their galas. Present at non-ABA conferences. I think that one's awesome, right? Publish in non-ABA journals so that people can see the work that we're doing outside of just our own journals. And I think finally, which is the scariest one for me, is run in your town or on your school board, right? Be that person and bring a behavior analytic perspective to those decision-making meetings where you can make change. That was it. I just love this. I just love this article.
Yeah.
Good job.
It's good. I'm wondering, I know we always love to share, like, is this a dissertation topic? I'd like to sort of expand on the Thompson article and say, okay, take their kind of checklist, look at all 50 states and where they are in terms of licensure and do like a reverse component analysis of like what pieces were there. And then like on a kind of semi-arbitrary scale of like how awesome was the final result, like which one got the best results. And therefore, if you want to make public policy change, these might be areas you want to focus most of your time on, you know, almost like a return of investment.
That's very smart.
That is smart.
You do that.
Nah, I don't want to do it. I
right.
like the part where a fund a group. I can do that, right?
Yeah,
I got some
fund a
change
group.
lying around. I'm going to do that one. All right. So, Diana, as you predicted,
Like and share.
Yeah. Hey, everybody, smash that like button on this public policy. As you predicted, we were going to run out of time and not really get to talk much about an analysis of voting and legislative behavior. Fortunately, I think of these articles, it was the least directly related to exactly how public policy works.
Wow, rude.
But I think it was an awesome read in terms of
well, I get to say
Skinner
a few
quote,
things,
you know?
right?
Yeah. I'm just saying you're not going to get to go through the whole thing.
That's okay. It's kind of what I predicted would happen because you're right. It's one piece of this larger public policy picture, but it's so worth noting that we have this article that is written not by a behavior analyst, right? But by a former member of the Massachusetts House of Representatives, John Sybeck.
I love him. I heart-eye him.
Yes.
Every time I see him.
Do you see him often?
You know, I'm just kidding. When I see him.
He is retired and
you
lives
break
in
into his
Florida
house,
now.
you know?
Yeah,
So
but when he was the Massachusetts House of Representatives, I did email him quite a bit.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nicely done. Well, then you're doing your public policy part, I guess you could say. But he took time out of his busy retirement schedule to write this article to be published in BAP just on how we can do a behavior analytic analysis of voting behavior, basically. And it's so cool, and you should definitely go read it if you're interested at all in this topic, and you probably should be because it's important. So it's just cool, I think. I don't know, I feel like honored that he like dropped by our field to do this. But he knows about behavior analysis because he is a psychologist as well. And he was heavily instrumental in getting licensure established in the state of Massachusetts. And that's where I know his name from. He's also done extensive advocacy work for individuals with disabilities as well as other vulnerable populations in the state too. So he stopped by to tell us that voting is behavior and it has many things that influence it, both on the antecedent side and the consequent side. And we would do well to study what those things are so that we have a solid understanding of why people vote and why they vote in the ways that they do. So he said, he kind of gave us like a history, just like your article did, Jackie, and saying like it used to be that behavior analysis was applied in many varying ways, such as towards recycling behavior and towards health behavior and crime prevention, etc. And we had these task forces that were set up specifically to do this type of outreach and public policy work. That's kind of all fallen by the wayside currently.
Darn COVID.
Right. But he talked about the complexities of these issues and the ways in which people respond to them. And a big shout out to Sigrid Glenn and her work on meta contingencies and what he called IBCs, which are interlocking behavioral contingencies, and the ways in which those affect these large-scale policy issues. So this is a extremely well-written, well thought out, and thoroughly goes through this topic. So please check it out. I'm like, damn, this guy is smart. And he gives us 2 figures, one for potential factors that influence the citizens' vote, and it's an ABC, right? It's antecedents, behavior, which is the vote, because that's like our unit of behavior, and then the contingencies. He does that for citizens, and he does it for elected officials as well. So I'll just tell you, like, he's like, some of the antecedents could be your party and the ideology, the position of the candidate, what you're actually doing on election day, how much campaign signage you saw, what are the local issues, did you hear about this on social media, what are your demographics? All of that plays into your decision to vote and how. And then on the reinforcement side, there may be different things that kind of maintain your voting behavior, such as fulfilling your civic duty, whether your candidate wins or loses. You participate in sort of, state your positioning on shared ideology. A policy issue was addressed. You used your vote as a way to send a message, and or it contributed towards your statements on your political position. So all of those are pieces, right? He's just saying like we need to be looking at all these components. And then he did the same thing for potential factors that influence a legislator's vote. And that is where we get into thinking about these public policy components too, because voting for a legislator is extremely complicated and they have many more opportunities to vote than an individual citizen does. But there are also just so many factors that are going into this. So thinking about the value of constituents writing in, he said that can sway someone's vote or push a legislator to vote towards that constituent by 11 to 12%. Just hearing from one person.
Wow.
I know the ways in which your legislative colleagues are voting, the positions and how much influence lobbyists, political action committees, which are called PACs, have on you. He says it's not that much, which is interesting, but I guess he was there and I wasn't.
You're like, I know, John Steinbeck.
The commitments that you've made to vote, the political party that you're a part of, et cetera, all of those have influence on the legislator's vote. And then on the reinforcer side, he does acknowledge that a huge piece of the consequence for voting and a lot of what likely functions to maintain legislators' behavior is their opportunities for re-election. But it is a complicated picture that he lays out, but maybe no one had laid it out before in such a way, and he does a really lovely job of it. So these are pieces for us to think about. He talks about whether behavior analysts have a place in public policy. We need to know and understand the system so that we can participate in them. And we are in a good position to have an understanding of these different pieces, right? So laying it out in this ABC way is something a lot of other people maybe don't do, but we are, well equipped to think about things in that way and therefore think about potential influences that these different pieces can have on voting behavior. So the short version is you should get involved. You should become a member of your local professional organization. You should absolutely vote. And if you're up for it, you should consider running for a legislative committee or a board or even office. So check it out. Thank you, Dr. John Steinbeck, for taking the time to write this article.
Okay. Well, now let's move into Dissemination Station. So for a topic, I think I started the show and was already planning to sort of check out because I don't like public policy. It's scary. It's leading to all these, things I've learned in life that have made me sad. I had quite a great time having this discussion with y'all. So perhaps part of what I learned is, as an everyday behavior analyst who's nervous about this, step one would be just kind of read these articles, think about them, and maybe talk about them with some colleagues, and then really think about what's a relevant action plan that you yourself. So for me, I think being more active in groups is a long-term goal I would like to do. However, I'm not really at a point in terms of time and other demands that I probably could do that right away, but I certainly could do more discussions of policy and be more on some, local committees and sort of look at how policy impacts the day-to-day in a way that I don't think I have before, to sort of make sure that that alignment is in play. And if it's not, okay, well, great. I can talk to some of my organizations about that. Perhaps that's my in. So there's my thought on the matter and some possible next steps. And I will also nominate Jackie to be the one of us who probably would run for a local school committee or some sort of public policy group.
After I threw up.
That would be you.
Well, it wouldn't be me. I would say that.
Definitely not be you.
I think
No offense, Diana, but it's not you.
that's okay. I think Jackie's got the drive, right? And you are like very strong on your ethics.
Thanks.
Yeah.
You're good.
And Rob,
Oh.
you have like a great
You
laugh.
I just seem
right?
like I'm a big fake phony, which would be great in government, is what you're saying?
Well, I was also going to say you look good in a suit.
Oh, thank you so much.
Oh, that's why you're married.
I think, Jackie, you do a good job of, you are a good listener and you are a good collaborator. But when
like
it's time to
crying.
make like a final decision, you are very clear as to this is the
It's true.
decision
It's
in a way
true.
that people weren't expecting and they don't know how to respond. So they're like, oh, okay, I guess, because you've done enough to build and pair yourself with,
that's
agreement
funny.
and pleasantness. That when you're like, and here's the actual answer, everyone's like, oh, okay, I guess so. I guess that is the answer.
Maybe this is my new thing, guys. Maybe I'm going to run for office somewhere.
You organize a local Cub Scout, all that junk where you have to go meet with people and figure out awful policies.
No thanks. I already did that.
I just agree with everyone. And so I'm like,
"You're
oh no,
right.
I've promised opposite things to
You're
all
right.
the people.
You're right. You're right over there.
I jump on a lot of tables and go, this is not the way. And usually no one wants to change anything based
I
on
like that.
not-
You're the Tom Cruise
All
of
right.
us.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I
right.
think the whole dissemination is just that it's a call to action that people should
We
get
need to
involved.
do something.
Right.
There's lots of calls to action. We shared them all on the show. You listen to the episode. Which one is right for you? I think we talked about some. Oh, Dinah, what's your call to action? What are you going to do?
She did it. She learned about public policy when she was very scared about doing it.
Okay. We're all on different
She opened
journeys up the
herself.
mountain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm promoting the issue by being on this podcast.
Oh,
Right.
thank you so much for your service.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, why don't you do one more bit of service, which is wrap up the show with our section pairings.
Okay, I can do that. Pairings is where I tell you about some other episodes you might want to check out if you thought this one was interesting. Now, caveat for this particular pairings has never happened before where I'm like, gosh, I don't know. Like, we've not touched on this topic before. So I don't have any that I'm saying you could go back and listen when we talked about this in this way. We don't have any of those. But I can tell you that there are some areas that this could be applicable toward. First of all, episode 211, we talked about variety in ABA with Dr. Matt Norman. You could check that out because that's part of that conversation is how else should we be working in our field. There are also some episodes that might be areas that one would be passionate about in order to do this type of lobbying and make change on a public policy level. Those would include episodes 135, Social Justice and ABA with Denisha Jingles and Aaron Donovan. Episode 233, Developing a Standard Set for Autism Outcomes with Dr. Ivy Chong. Episode 246, Trans-Affirming Care with Werner Leland. And you could also check out episode 1003, which is where we talked about the Nudge book in our book club episode because they also bring up some of these similar ideas. Now, the other part of pairings is that I recommend a snack for you to enjoy while you listen to these episodes that relates in some particular way to what we've talked about today. So our snacks today, we have several. We're going to have some.
Make sure you include mine.
I will. We're going to have some bananas. We're going to have some apples. We're going to have some delicious chocolate chip cookies.
Warm.
And then some make your own hot chocolate. And do you know why? Did you look at it, Rob?
I see it on the notes.
Oh,
Why?
okay, fine. Because those are all things that you can have in a lobby, like a hotel lobby.
Oh.
When I read that, I chuckled quietly to myself because we were on the show. So I didn't want you, but I was like, I added the chocolate chip cookies because that is my favorite thing to get in a hotel lobby.
Oh, I was going to say, the last time I went to visit the Mass State House and like walk around, they didn't have any of these things available.
Well,
hotel lobby.
I don't really understand what lobbying is, even after we've just done this episode. So I still imagine that it takes place in a hotel lobby.
It doesn't.
Yeah, no. It's like the lobby of the
let's hope it doesn't.
House of Representatives or
let's hope
Congress.
It doesn't.
There's no snacks.
I
You're
don't
kidding.
think so, no.
I'll bring snacks.
wow.
I'll be the best lobbyist
Bummer.
there is. I'll bring
No.
all those snacks and be like, look, hotel lobby snacks, lobbying.
I think when we talk about buildings I don't want to be in, hospitals are number one, state houses are number two. No, thank you.
Okay, well, there you go. Pairings.
All right. Well, folks, thank you so much for listening to our episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If so, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're subscribed to our show. We'd love it if you checked us out on our website, abainsidetrack.com, where you can find links to all of these articles, as well as to our previous episodes and links to purchase CEs for pretty much all of our episodes. And if you are interested in doing that, don't forget to get the second secret code word. It is Clover, Clover, Clover. Because when we were recording this, it's St. Patrick's Day. Is that why?
Yeah.
Ah, great. You get a 4-leaf clover or a 3-leaf clover. Whatever your clover, you're rolling in it. Clover. We want to also remind our listeners that if you want even more ABA Inside Track or would like discounts on CEs or access to some of our free CEs for subscribing, you can go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where you can sign up to vote on our quarterly listener choice episodes and get free CEs, or get our quarterly book club episodes. If you listen to the preview from this month, you know that this summer is going to be the summer of book clubs. So it might be a great time to sign up and join to see all of those ahead of everybody. Get them, in some cases, a year ahead of everybody, as well as some discounts and free CEs for those special episodes. Again, that's patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. And hey, if you are someone who does public policy or loves public policies and wants to get a shout out on the show, email us at abainsidetrack@gmail.com. We will say who you are and say thank you so much for being one of the enthusiastic people who is leading the charge around public policy. Any other questions, you can also email there. We want to say some final thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro, outro music, Kyle Sturry for our interstitial music, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his awesome editing work. We'll be back next week with another fun-filled episode, but until then, keep responding. Bye!
Bye.
Whoa.